this series, Hope in Hard Times. Now, it's stating the obvious to say that the world has changed, but we have a tendency to think that this is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened before. But the history of the world shows that there's always change. I grew up in post-World War II, and there were still reminders of what it was like to live during the war. There were the ration stamps, there were the blackout material for windows, and there was still a lot of grief and fear around. War was declared and life changed. Back in the late 1600s and 1500s BC, the people of Israel were overrun by Babylon, and the majority were taken as exiles into Babylon. Life for them just changed dramatically. We have Psalm 137, which expresses their grief at being in a strange land. How can we sing our songs in a strange land? And then at the end of the psalm, you feel their anger when they say, happy is he who repays you for what you've done to us, he who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. There were hard times for them. Now, the prophet Jeremiah was writing at this time, and the word that God gave to them was this: build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives to your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so they too may have sons and daughters. In other words, he's saying, accept the situation you are in and make the most of it. Don't keep looking back at what once was, and don't just sit there and dream of being freed. Get on with life where you are. And it wasn't just a case of put up with it. He was saying to them, you need to pray for the peace and prosperity of Babylon, because when they prosper, so will you. So he tells them, live positively, live with purpose in the situation you are in. But he didn't leave them without hope. This is the word that Jeremiah gave: for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Okay, it was 70 years before the people of Israel were freed and returned to Jerusalem. So the original exiles didn't go back. But there was a future for the people of God. There was hope. So while God's telling them to live in the situation you are in, he doesn't leave them saying, well, that's it, that's the end of all things. He says there is a hope, there is a future. So the message to those whose lives had changed so dramatically was wait and trust in God. And while they waited, they were to live productively and purposefully. When God did arrange the return of the exiles, it was a fairly amazing act. The Persian king Cyrus ordered that they be returned, and he even provided the materials for rebuilding Jerusalem. And we have the words in Isaiah 40. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Now that's a picture of a custom there used to be when there was a general returning victorious with all his slaves, his booty. They would build a road and he'd make this triumphal entry back to his hometown. And so this is saying this is going to be God's triumphal entry to Jerusalem. God has a plan, and his plan will always happen. Now, in these difficult times, I think we can take two things from that. We're not to live regretting what has gone. We're not to live in baseless dreams of what we want to happen. But he wants us to live productively and fully in the circumstances that we're in. But we can also trust God has not abandoned us. He will be working for us, and he'll be working for what is best for us, because God's plans are never defeated.
Hope that burns within my heart, that gives me strength for every passing day. glory now revealing me, the heart yet drives all doubt away. I stand in Christ with sins forgiven, and Christ in me the hope of heaven, my highest calling and my deepest joy, to make His will my home. There is a hope that lifts my weary head, a consolation strong against despair. And when the world has plunged me in its deepest pit, I find the Savior there. Through present suffering, futures fear, He whispers courage in my ear, for I am safe in everlasting arms, and they will lead me home. There is a hope that stands the test of time, that lifts my eyes beyond the blackening grave, to see the matchless beauty of a day divine, when I behold His face.